looked at it and I was like, I don't think God, he just accepts this.
I still want and everything submitted through there, so you still have to go do that. But so just to be clear, everybody should be turning it into Blackboard the way it was put out, but this was an extra option. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about voting today and democracy. We mentioned a topic a couple times throughout the semester that economists call public choice theory. And I want to give you an illustration of how we might get outcomes in a democratic way. So we're going to create kind of a little model, a different type of economic model. And we're going to make some assumptions, which is what economists do when you make economic models. And here's going to be our voting assumptions. So people are going to vote yes if you get something out of it, if you get more. People are going to abstain. What does that mean? Just not vote, do nothing, not vote. If you have no change from voting, have no change to your situation. And finally, you're going to vote no if you get less. How far-fetched are those assumptions? Are they way out there? Does that sound pretty reasonable, at least for starters? All right, so pretty reasonable assumptions, I think. So here's what we're going to do. I want to show you two allocations of goods. Consider two allocations of goods. So allocation 1 is everybody gets 1 unit of a good. So you're going to have to draw 10 of these out. I'm not sure if I hit 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, short one. 10. So this vector here represents a allocation of goods. So you can think about this being maybe person 1, person 2, person 3, person 4, person 5, person 6, person 7, person 8, person 9, and person 10. And then I want to show you an alternative allocation. So let's call our alternative allocation, let's, I guess, just call it A2. And under A2, we're going to have, let me go in the red here. Person 1 has 9. Person 2 has 1. And person 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 all have 0. Which allocation appears to be more fair? 1, right? We all kind of equally have a number of goods. Maybe this could be, rich versus poor, right? The separation of rich versus poor doesn't seem like maybe quite as fair of an allocation. But who knows what fairness is? We all have different thoughts on what's fair and what's not. Did this person earn it and the rest of the people didn't do anything? Who knows? We don't know the circumstances. So we're kind of ignoring those details for now. So my question to you is, could we ever start with this allocation and through a democratic process get to this? Would society ever allow things or have things possibly gravitate towards that through a democratic process? So, the democratic process that we're going to use is majority rule. Majority rule. All right, so I asked Taylor to divvy up 10. You got 10 there, Taylor? Why don't you come up here for a moment? Yeah, bring them. You take one, and then I got these. Let's come over here. So I need, well, let's just take, what do we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Why don't we go all the way down to Michael? You 7, come on up. And then Jesse, you're right there. Why don't you come up too? And I want to just stand in order here. Me being here, Taylor, you can come over here. And then you can work yourself down that aisle if you want, or however we want to do it. That's, yeah, we can just kind of circle around. But I want to be in order. So we've got person 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way down, correct? Here's the allocation that I was talking about that doesn't seem so fair. And let's just change the games. Now, change the game a bit. So the unique aspect to this game is I'm going to be the agenda setter. So I'm kind of like the president or Congress or the House ruler or something. But in terms of our meeting process, I set the agenda. Okay, so we call that person the agenda setter. So everybody take a bracelet here. I had too much coffee today. My hands are just shaking. Jacked up the caffeine. Michael. All right. So now we're back to A1. We're going to follow, all of us, I want you to follow these assumptions now. If you get more, vote yes. If there's no change to your situation, vote no. Or abstain. And vote no if you get less. So, let's see. I'm going to take you 4. I'm going to take these 4 bracelets. My proposal of policy change in the world is to take these 4 bracelets and distribute them evenly to the first 4 people. Okay? So, and I'm sorry, let's see, we need, sorry, screwed up. First 3 people and then the last 2. Okay? So 4 bracelets, right? We're going to go 1, 2, 3. I think I'm screwing up already. I got 5 people. I need the odd. All right. We're going to take the last 3 bracelets. Okay, we're going to take the last 3 bracelets and distribute them. Gosh, I had this worked out on paper, but as I was saying that, I screwed up. All right, let me do it this way.
You want 11 people?
I think I might need 11 people, and I kind of worked that out ahead of time, and that was in my brain, but let's see. I think I can make this work, though.
Or if we needed 4 and 4 tonight.
Or I need a half a bracelet is what I need. I need multiple bracelets. Number 11. Alicia. Michael. Oops, sorry. It would have worked if I had a couple bracelets and I could split the 2. So going one at a time is what threw a wrench in my game. All right, now, new wrench in our game. I got 5 people that we're going to distribute out. So now, let me take the last 4. Am I still going to run into the same problem? I still need a half a bracelet, don't I?
Why don't you just give everybody...
Let's do 2 bracelets for everybody. That seems like an easier fix. Problem solved. There's an important result that I'm going to get to here eventually. But that's part of the fun of doing experiments. I haven't done this maneuver I haven't done this in class for a long time. Okay, so now everybody's got 2. Whew! All right. Now I got it. Now we're set. All right. So I'm going to take, and now we got 11 people. In fact, we're okay. Alicia, why don't you sit down, because then we'll stay with 10. Sorry. Put those down. Yeah, put those right there. We'll leave those get wasted by society by dead weight loss. All right. Now I'm going to take the 4 bracelets, okay, those 4 people, and eliminate them all. Okay? So I'm going to take 2 bracelets from each of them, and then we're going to spread them out evenly among the 6 people. Okay? So all of you are going to get at least 1 extra bracelet. Okay? So I'm going to do that by there's 8 bracelets coming in, right? So I'm going to give you all the remaining 1 more bracelet, and then I'm going to take the rest. Okay? Following those assumptions, that's our vote. So we've got 3, 6, 9, 10 people. We're going to take 4, and that's the distribution. Got it? You guys are going to lose your 2. You guys are all going to get 1. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against? No. Let's see the hands go up. No. Good. Motion passes. There you go. All right. Now we're on to something here. Okay. Well, Michael, you guys did a little extra bonus stuff there. Okay. So now we're down to 6. Next policy change. We're going to take those 6 bracelets from these 2 people, drop them down to 0, and then I will give 1 to each one of these people, and I'm going to take the rest. You guys will all get a bracelet. All those in favor say aye. 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 Those against? No. Motion passes. And here's your bracelets. Now, next policy change here. Going to go to Jessie, drop her down to 0. 1 to each one of these people, the rest to me. All those in favor, say aye. 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 Those against, no. Motion passes. Next policy change. I'm going to take all of Brooks, drop her down to 0. Distribute 1 to Taylor, the rest to me. All those in favor say aye. 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 Those against? No. Motion passes. Last policy change. I'm going to drop Taylor down to 0 and give Brooke 1. And the rest go to me. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against? Motion passes. Voila. Through a democratic process, we're able to get that type of distribution. Under those circumstances, little food for thought in when we hit the voting booths and how politicians bring things to the agenda on what gets voted on and what gets done. Thank you. Grab a seat. Yes, little clap. All right, sorry I butchered that at first. I totally forgot about needing a couple to split that up. But I'm glad I brought the whole bag here and I didn't just grab 10 on the way. So, okay, so that is some interesting aspects that most people don't think about when we hit the voting booths. We tend to have this perception that, well, that's fair as long as majority rules, right? But the voting process doesn't work when we have rational ignorance potentially there or potentially prevalent. So rational ignorance is something, don't remember which economist to give credit to on this, is a situation where the voter has costs that are greater than the benefits of voting, so they don't vote. They don't care. They just abstain. They're busy doing their own thing. And so we don't always get the most positive social outcomes just because we go through the democratic process of majority rule. And most people tend to think we do. But it's not always the case. All right, questions or comments on that? Now, what assumptions would you start to tweak as maybe the vote comes this way? What's a little far-fetched about this economic model? I think it helps us in one point to see where things could go, but what might be a little far-fetched with these assumptions? The abstaining, yeah. So it's very possible the abstainers could start to see the control of power coming to the dictator here and like, whoa, wait a second, I'm jumping in. Now all of a sudden I care because I learned in economics class that if we start to concentrate all the power into one group, we might be in some big trouble, right? And so then all of a sudden the abstainers would jump in. But it certainly points out how things can be swayed in the meantime through using even a democratic process. Okay. So today we got to get into more of the Chapter 13 material, and that's what we'll be doing the rest of today, and then we'll have a little bit of wrap-up probably on Monday, and we'll do some review for the final exam. So we've talked a lot about G's and T's, but we haven't really gotten down to the specifics of how much those G's are and how much those T's are. So I want to start off with that and look at the actual budget for the United States in probably the most simplest terms possible. So, I guess recall the government budget, where we had the sequester and we can't seem to have agreement on what to do. We've set it up in the terms of government savings. Well, really, we don't necessarily want the government to save anything necessarily. And so the idea of having savings or a deficit just comes about from not balancing this equation. Inflows coming in through taxes, which we talked about with the fair tax, either coming through income tax, sales tax, capital gains tax, corporate tax. I mean, there's excise taxes, all kinds of taxes. But some sort of inflow coming into the government minus the G, government spending, which we've done many times. So in your Chapter 13, we'll get a little bit more specific, and this is going to be receipts. So think of these as tax receipts or tax revenue. And the G will generically label outlays. So outlays of spending, outlays of money by the government. And so here's our 2011 budget numbers. These were the projected numbers, by the way, prior to 2011 getting in, so this is a little bit data, but this is data from 2011. And so our receipts we get from personal income tax, Social Security tax. Hopefully you guys have learned now that Social Security was never a big 401k retirement plan. It's always been a tax and transfer program. Take from the young, give to the old. It's always been that way. Social Security tax, corporate income tax, those big, evil, huge corporations, and lastly, some indirect taxes. These are sometimes special taxes, and let's just put an other category. It's a fairly small category. Sometimes luxury goods, sometimes intermediate goods. So there's some indirect business taxes usually that are in this category. So personal income taxes ended up being about $1,076 billion. 1,000 billion is 1.07 trillion. So let's just say that that's a big old trillion. Social Security taxes was 1,054 trillion, or billion, about a trillion, similar to personal income tax. Corporate income taxes, got to get those, that group. Corporations, of course, are not legal citizens, but we're going to tax them anyway. Bigger or smaller than personal income tax? What's your gut? What does your gut tell you? Higher? Bigger? Mine did too. It's not. Less than half. Now, that's a little bit misleading, but 432.432 trillion. So less than half of personal income tax. Now, I want to interject right there and ask, who of you is familiar with the double taxation that comes about with the setup of a corporation? Double taxation, what does that mean? Who remembers what that means? Important concept, both in economics and those of you who are studying some accounting. Double taxation that comes about when you form yourself as a corporation. Somebody out there knows it. Be brave. Give me a guess.
Aren't just the sales and whatever revenue that you have as a corporation taxed, and then as you distribute that personally, that is also taxed to the person?
Not quite, but I'll give you an extra credit point because you were the first one to jump on it, Michael. Nice job. You're close. It's not tax on the sales, but on the income, on the profit. So what happens with the profit is, imagine the business is going about its business, earning some profit. They have sales of $1,000 and expenses of $800. They got $200 worth of profit. Government's going to tax that $200, and that falls into this line item. Then there is 200 people that own this corporation. Each one of them is going to get a dollar distribution from the profits. And now the government's going to tax that dollar on every individual, which comes up on this line item. So really, profits get double taxed the way the current code reads. They get taxed at the corporate level, and then they get taxed at the distribution level to the actual owners of the corporation. So that's the double taxation that goes on, and that's what we're seeing here. So it's maybe not quite fair to say that this is the corporate income tax, because part of this number is this going on too. Okay? Finally, this indirect business transfers is 245 billion or 0.25 trillion. Giving us total receipts here of $2.807 trillion. What is our gross domestic product, roughly? How many trillions? 17. It's approaching there, not quite there, but 15 trillion, 14 to 15 trillion dollars. 3 trillion of it is going to income tax, right? Or is going to the government in the form of taxes this way. Okay. They had a ball game today if people didn't figure that out. All right. So, what about on the spending side? So the G are our outlays. Transfer payments. Transfer payments, Social Security, unemployment, welfare programs, anything where you're transferring money from one person to the next based on need, that's all lumped together. Medicare, all of those payments are transfer payments totaling $2.588 trillion. Now, what about good old weapons of mass destruction and toilet paper for the White House? Expenditures on goods and services. The G, the weapons, the bombs, the airplanes, all of the national defense items, space exploration, all that kind of stuff. Bigger or smaller than transfer payments? Bigger? Another one where it's just not according to your gut. So transfer payments are actually much larger than the $1.181 trillion. I totally would agree with you. I would have normally thought that type of stuff would be much higher than transfer payments. It's not. Finally, what about that big old national debt that we have? We have to pay interest on that debt, as we learned in our global finance work in the loanable funds market. Part of that is owed to China, for instance. China is our largest owner of government debt. So interest payments on our debt, $360 billion. So just a 0.36 trillion. We add them all up, we get $4.129 trillion. Deficit or debt? Deficit. 1 year, 2.8 versus 4.1 leaves us $1.3 trillion. $1.322 trillion this year only short. So the debt has to go up by $1.3 trillion. What's our gross domestic product again? 15. 1.3. Is that 10% of GDP or 1% of GDP? 10% of income is money we don't have. Spending we're doing that we really don't have, but we got an answer. We'll borrow it from China, or we'll borrow it. Don't forget, Americans, by the way, traditionally, almost all of the national debt was owned by Americans. And it wasn't really towards maybe the globalization of the world and the last 20 years where China started having an appetite like, oh, well, that's a good investment. Those Americans always pay their bills. Yeah, that sounds good. And it's a free market. So is that a big deal or not? I'd argue it's not, in short. But it is what it is. It is what it is. And so the one issue that comes out, remember I talked about the swimming pool, where if one of our policies is if I scoop a pail of water from here and I run to the other side, we've displaced it, but the pool level's still the same. Well, that concept was true to some degree when Americans owned all of the debt. But now we're scooping out the water and bringing it over to China and pouring it out. So there's a few extra effects in there that can play out. But remember, the current account, exports and imports, there was that connection between that and the capital account. So there's a lot of other things that are balancing things out. All right, questions or comments on that? Now, this has gone down a little bit. Our projections for the current year are less than this. In fact, when this first came out, they started hedging this down. They started making some adjustments. But at the end of the day, the current Congress, I don't think they've been able to get it less than $900 billion is the last thing. So 900 to, what's 100 trillion between friends, right? Or 100 billion between friends, for plus or minus. At the end of the day, it's still $1 trillion. And there's some need for addressing some of this. The biggest need, though, is probably on what that money's being spent on. What is this going towards? Is it going towards something that's going to increase economic activity, increase more tractors, more computers? Well, that's probably the big argument against transfer payments, is that it's not going towards that. Here's roads, bridges, dams, national defense, security in our nation, blah, blah, blah. Potentially, again, arguments can be made on what the appropriate level is between Democrats and Republicans or whoever's in control of those sorts of decisions. But for the most part, an argument can be made that those are going towards something productive, potentially. Although, it can be argued whether that road or that bridge really needed to be repaired or not, because that was certainly going on during this last round of spending. There was talks of roads getting fixed that just had a crack in them, right? Oh, let's go put somebody to work, get that road fixed. Well, you can't, that doesn't do anything for us if there's not a real problem that leads to something productive happening.
So we're taking our water out the swimming pool and dumping it on the ground.
Yes, and that's even worse. You're right. So that's worse than the transfer, because here at least you're getting something productive out of it, or at least you're just transferring money from one person to the other, that whether it gets spent at Walmart or whether it gets spent at Tiffany's on something new, at least the money's getting spent and it's kind of staying in that multiplier process, getting spent around. But yeah, getting nothing out of it is probably the worst situation. Okay, any other questions or comments there? Okay, I think since we're talking about debt and deficit a little bit, I think we'll jump to something that's a little towards the end of the chapter on debts and deficit. A little model to show whether we should always avoid debt and deficit, or is there some merit to having possibly debt and or deficit. So let's dissect the issue of debt and deficit. So I want to draw a graph this time measuring real GDP on the horizontal axis. And over here, we're just going to be measuring dollars. And I want to think about what the tax collection function looks like. Like, how do we collect taxes? What would that line look like? In other words, would the tax revenues, would it look like this? Would it look like this? What does tax revenues look like? In other words, as we start to have more income, is the revenue that's collected higher or the same? What do you think that function looks like? Does it look like, let's call it A or B? What do you think? As we have more income, does the government collect more money or less? Or does it stay the same? So imagine, let's put a little numbers in here. Let's say you make $100,000 a year versus $20,000 a year. What would that? We can put this back to an individual human being, because ultimately GDP is the aggregation of all the human beings that are running around on our island. So what does that look like? Does the person paying $20,000 pay $6,000 tax, and the person making $100,000 pays $6,000 tax? No, right? So we got tax collections going up as we collect more tax. Now, the shape of this might not even be a line. It could be increasing at an increasing rate or increasing at a decreasing rate. I mean, it could. I'm not even going to go there, but I just want to point that out, because that is an important issue. what did it mean to have a progressive tax?
Rich pays more.
Rich pay proportionately more than the poor do on their taxes. So in that case, that would even cause this to basically shoot up higher, but certainly not a flat tax. This would really be a flat per person tax, possibly the way I've got this. Everybody pays $6,000. It doesn't matter how much you make. So the real tax function, you guys could redraw one if you want to keep that thought, or you can just do whatever, but I'm just going to erase it. So we got a tax revenue function that's increasing with output. And we see that when we think about big T equals the tax rate times our gross income. We saw this equation before, which was then related to our disposable income is equal to our gross income minus our tax payments. So we had a couple equations that kind of help support the look of that. At the end of the day, tax revenues go up if the economy's doing better. In other words, the government's going to collect more money naturally if the economy starts to do better. Now, what about spending? What about spending? Would that look like this or this? So G, the government spending, as income gets higher and higher, is the government spending more or less as the economy prospers, or the same amount? Or is it spending more? That would be an upward sloping. I'll just give you a hint. It's not that. Okay? So with this one, the government might say, okay, we're going to spend $4.129 trillion this year, and that's it. Period. End of story. That's what we're spending. We're buying weapons, and we got it all lined up. Boom. Doesn't matter how much. That's one possibility. But what do we know about welfare programs? What do we know about unemployment insurance? Those people who are making unemployment claims. Do those tend to be higher or lower as the income of the country goes up? Lower, right? So those programs start to vanish when people start to prosper more on average. Less unemployment. We made that connection before when we did the goods market. So as the economy has more and more income, there's less of those transfer payments going on. So with that type of spending, which we call needs-based spending, we'd have a government outlay function that would look like this. And so G is downward sloping due to less needs-based spending when income grows. What do we mean by that? Less welfare programs, less unemployment claims, that type of stuff. Needs-based spending. People need the money. The social safety net doesn't need to catch as many people when the economy's doing well. Okay, so what this merely sets up is that what's going on right here? What about this level of income? What about that level of income? At this level of income, what's true about the deficit? It's zero. We have a balanced budget. Good. So at Y1, the government has a balanced budget. We haven't seen that one in a long time, right? In theory, we might think that the system would be set up pretty good if the potential level of real GDP was that level. So what if Y1 was the potential level of GDP? Remember our long-run aggregate supply curve? Basically the same concept. In other words, the government is set up to run a balanced budget when we're operating at the long-run expected potential level for the economy. Now, as the economy falls into recession, we know that in the long run it might be there, but in the short run it could be high or low, high or low, high or low. That was the oscillations that took place in the business cycle. So if GDP falls off to Y2, what's true about the deficit? Or savings. Did the deficit disappear or did it get bigger? Is there a deficit? There's a deficit, right. So at Y2, when the economy has slumped, then government spending goes up. Why? Because people are unemployed, so they're getting unemployment claims. More people went on welfare. All of a sudden the social programs kick in, right? And so the level of G at Y2 is G2. The level of tax revenues, of course, income's down, so taxes are down. So taxes are less than what's being spent, and we have a deficit equal to this vertical distance here, G minus T, or T minus G ends up being a negative number. As the economy heats up and bumps over to Y3, we have an inflationary gap or a recessionary gap? Inflationary gap. So as we heat up and we're going through an expansionary phase in the business cycle, what naturally happens is the government ends up collecting more taxes. And maybe I should have put that a little higher, a little lower. You guys did fine on your paper, but it doesn't have to be the same, so I'm going to bump it down a notch, just so I can go like this, and call this T, T3. The tax is being collected when we're at this level of output. And this is the amount of spending. We have less welfare, less of those programs going on at G3. And the government runs a surplus. We had a tiny little surplus back in the Bush era, and he gave it back to people, saying, oh, well, we got this extra money flowing around, which there was some other circumstances that might have been pushed why that was the case, but we've got the surplus. What might be logical to do is to use that surplus to pay down the debt that was incurred here, right? So you see how, in theory, as we go through expansion and contraction and we go back and forth, it might be okay for the government to run a deficit once in a while, but that should be then offset by a surplus once in a while, right? But that's not apparently the case with the amount of spending and taxes being collected by the United States government. That's not the story. So let me write down, I should have maybe kept that bullet here, but so note, over time, surpluses and deficits cancel each other out, allowing debt to be close to zero, in theory. Now let's get back to reality. If we think back to even what I did at the beginning of class today, we learned that programs might pass differently. As we start to heat up and there's a surplus, and there's still hunger out in the world, right? There's still people we want to help. There's still more weapons to buy. There's still plenty of bad guys that we have to plan against. What tends to happen when we run surpluses, do you think? What would be the natural progression? Spend them. Increase G. Well, we got this extra money. Why would we want to pay down the debt? We have a better use for that. We've got people that are in need. We've got weapons that need to be purchased. And so it tends to be easy to spend that money rather than manage it for the long haul. The short-run gains are too tempting, right? And so people's self-interest, especially the politicians, they want to get elected next time. Well, people like it when they are able to get things for the people in their district, right? So they tend to be short-sighted as well, potentially. Not all of them. But we tend to see an ever-increasing G, and that's precisely what we've seen in the United States over the last 40 to 60 years, is an ever-increasing G. And that's where we're at today while we're persistently running deficits. So here's what today's picture looks like. So let's call this the USA Today, not to play off of the newspaper at all. The USA Today, go ahead and draw a T function that's upward sloping and a G function that's downward sloping. Real GDP here, dollars here. Don't draw the vertical one yet. We know that the balanced budget would be where those two lines cross. But over time, due to those increases in G, what I think is pretty obvious for the United States is that the potential level of the economy is somewhere over here. It's not centered up because we're just not seeing that over the last 30 years. And so even when the economy is going full tilt, we still have a deficit. And we call that a structural deficit. A structural deficit. In other words, the way we're currently running our program here with the level of spending and the way we collect taxes, the combination of those two things, we're always running a deficit. By design almost. It's like we have the structure of the institutions is such that we're going to persistently run a deficit. Now, what happens when we go through the oscillations here, right? When we go through the ups and the downs of the economy, well, when the economy slumps down to Y1, we have a deficit, but now it's composed into a couple parts. Notice that we've got the structural part and we've got the cyclical part. So we're kind of decomposing the deficit. Here's the total, which is cyclical. Cyclical's the orange part. And structural's the red part. The red's going to be there either way. Down a point on the text, Michael. Over here, it's all cyclical. So this is a cyclical deficit. The only reason we have this one is because of the ups and downs of the economy. Cyclical surplus, cyclical deficit. Question, Lindsay?
Oh, I was just wondering if the structural deficit goes all the way, like if the area is all the way to the green, or if it stops at
Well, this is the amount that would persist in the long run, so we are kind of transferring that over to here so that it's the same amount,
Okay.
because that's what the one that's persisting over time as we decompose it. Okay, any other questions there? All right, we'll see you Monday.